Welcome to Exceptionally Speaking, the podcast where we explore how to better understand and support exceptional learners. I'm Dr. Meryl, and each week I sit down with dedicated educators, parents, and advocates to share real strategies, inspiring stories, and moments of hope. If you're enjoying these conversations or learning something new, please be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Today, I'm especially excited to reconnect with someone I've known since high school, Dr. Erin Castle. After many years, we found our way back into each other's lives through a shared passion for gifted education and creating more equitable learning environments. Erin's career path took an unexpected turn after working on a presidential campaign. That experience made her realize she didn't want to go into politics, only to find herself entering one of the most political arenas out there, public education. Over the past 15 years, she's served as a high school English teacher, a special programs coordinator for advanced academics, and recently completed her doctorate with a focus on one of the most important elements of student success, belonging. In this episode, Erin and I talk about what belonging really looks like in high school advanced academic spaces, especially in AP and IB programs, and how issues of access and representation still persist. We also explore her work with twice exceptional students, the impact of authentic teacher-student relationships, and the hope she sees in the next generation of learners. You can find more information about Erin and all of our guests at hex24press.com. Please enjoy Exceptionally Speaking with Dr. Erin Castle. Hey, Erin, it's so good to see you.
Hi, good to see you too, Dr. Meryl.
It's so nice that we have a chance to talk today. I have a ton of things I've just been wondering about your work and what you've been doing over the past years as an educator. So I'd love to jump in just with your story, your journey to becoming an educator and what that's been like and how you ended in the position that you are today.
I think in many ways, I've always been an educator because I started at a very young age just lining up all of my stuffed animals and my dolls and unwilling neighborhood children and playing school pretty constantly, even on the days that were like after school. So it's always kind of been in the back of my mind, and I knew that I also was a writer and I wanted to do some of that in some capacity. And when I decided to go into education, it was actually after I have a bachelor's and a master's in English literature and in emphasis in creative nonfiction writing. And I didn't really know what I was going to do with that. And teaching seemed like a very practical pathway. And it was also kind of going back to my roots as a stuffed animal doll educator. And so I went on to get my teaching certification. And that was after I had worked on Barack Obama's campaign for change from his Iowa preliminary campaign right into the general election. And I knew I didn't want to go into politics. Little did I know I was going into politics in the field of education. Like, who knew? But that's what brought me to the field. Now, I teach at Lubbock High School now in Lubbock, Texas, and that's where I was born and raised, and that's where I graduated from back in 2003. And when I went into education, it was kind of with the idea that I would like to educate students at the secondary level and be the English teacher that I didn't really feel like I had. When I was in high school, I didn't really have many teachers that I was able to connect with, and I didn't feel really very much like I belonged in those higher level classrooms. So when I went into teaching, it was with that in mind, was be the person that you needed at that moment in time. And I landed at Lubbock High 14 years ago. Just kind of a position opened up. I went to interview and transitioned over there. And I have been teaching there and coordinating now for the advanced academic programming over there, the International Baccalaureate and the Advanced Placement Capstone Diploma Program for the last 5 years. And I'm in the classroom in a limited capacity as well.
So is your role now more what we would think like a counselor role, but specific for advanced academics, or how does that work? What do you actually do?
I mean, I tell people constantly, I'm not a counselor, and I'm not that kind of doctor. But I call myself an advisor, a coach, mentor, and not a counselor. So they still have the kids that I advise, they still have their counselor regular school counselor.
So, what I was wondering is how you decided to go get your doctorate and what question you were really focusing on, and what were you seeing in education that really made you want to seek a doctorate in this area?
That's a great question. When I started teaching at Lubbock High, I started in English 2 pre-AP, and very quickly I was hired with the intent to move me into AP Language and Composition because of my background in creative nonfiction. And when I moved into that role, I noticed that just like when I was at Lubbock High School and sitting in advanced academic classes, I noticed that there were fewer students of color sitting in those rooms than I would have expected based on the diverse school population. The school itself is almost 70% students of color, but what I was seeing in advanced academics classrooms was flipped. So you would have about 70% white versus 30% students of color, where the school population would, you would reason that it would be the opposite. So I actually had a student who, at the end of the year, a black student, she told me that mine was the only advanced class in which she felt like she belonged. And that's a boon for like your pride in establishing that kind of culture in your classroom. But more than that, it was really heartbreaking for me to hear that, because obviously she should have felt like she belonged in every room that she wanted to sit in. And I started wondering about belonging in academic spaces and what that looks like for different people from different backgrounds. For me, and probably for you, belonging in a classroom, that was assumed. You go to school, you belong in that classroom. And for others, it's not. And so that was when I applied to do the doctorate in learning and organizational change through Baylor's online program. I did it with that in my application. Was I have this question that I can't answer without doing a study of some kind about belonging and what that looks like, in specifically looking at international baccalaureate and advanced placement classrooms. So that is what I did.
And for people who maybe aren't as familiar, can you give a simple difference between AP and IB?
Yes. So in a nutshell, the International Baccalaureate is a multidisciplinary program that centers on a class called the Theory of Knowledge, which is a class. At the heart of it is the question of how do we come to know what we claim to know. So there's a very philosophical basis to that class that reaches into all the different disciplines and ties them together. So it's a holistic approach to education that is very student centered, and at the same time there's a prescriptive curriculum to all of it, but it's also allows for a lot of personal exploration and a lot of facilitation from the teacher side, as opposed to what some call like sit and get, where you have a lecturer who's just kind of giving you what you need to learn. You're kind of building that pathway yourself. With advanced placement, it's more compartmentalized. Every subject has its own place. You won't see English crossing over into science, crossing over into art, where on the IB side, it's kind of reflective of the real world and the ways in which different areas of knowledge are tied together, even though we don't think about them that way when we're delineating the fields that people go into. There are so many more similarities, I think, than there are differences. That's, in a nutshell, it's a very different approaches to teaching and learning, I think.
And through IB at the high school level, are students getting college credit for courses in the same way that you would in AP when you pass at a certain
Yes.
grade? Okay. So when you did your research, I do want to geek out a little on your research. What did you do to really dig into to research what belonging looked like for students of color in advanced classes?
I decided to do a single case study and qualitative in nature, and I did a series of surveys to about 40 students, and those students coming from what I called Flatland High School. And then of those surveyed, I interviewed 13 students, And then I ultimately selected 6 of those that I felt were a representative sample of the population that I was seeking to better understand. And I asked them a series of questions about their educational background and looking at how did they navigate elementary versus middle school versus high school. And I use sense of belonging as part of the theoretical framework. And then in addition to that, McMillan and Chavez's sense of community theory, which has different, I would call them tiers almost of, I represented the visual in a tree and of course called it a community because we're nerdy.
Nice.
But
Yes.
but
Love
the
it.
first, like with the first part of it being just access. So how do students gain actual just the access, just having the course available to them and choosing that pathway. And then from there it branches out into different like levels of feeling like you have influence in a community, feeling like you get reinforcement from that community, the depth of belonging that you feel within that community, and then categorized their responses based on their experiences, kind of based on their wording around those things.
Okay, yeah, that makes total sense. And so, what did you learn? What did you take away? I know we have the big chapter 5
Yeah.
that you wrote, right? But what did you really take away that can be impactful right now for educators?
My major takeaway from those conversations were that access is one thing, and access is relatively easy. We can open the doors of International Baccalaureate and advanced placement all day long. And just for background, those were programs that in like the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, those became very popular pathways for a lot of magnet schools added those academic pathways. And to be frank, they became, and whether it was intentional or not, they became new ways of segregation and moving students. Now you look at it and you can say, well, it's a socioeconomic disparity, but it was also racial. So pushing students towards those pathways at one point in time was academic tracking. And it just looked like a teacher or a counselor would recommend a student, or a parent would recommend a student for a program. They would be placed in that program. And then everybody else was going to whatever standard level, like the basic level of a course, as opposed to an advanced level of the course. So the access point for Flatland High School was open door from kind of the time that this study, I went back a decade. So open door policy, but students still had to have knowledge. What I found was that for the access point, having parents who were invested in navigating the education system and familiar already coming into the school with its academic programming was essential to whether or not a student would assume that they could do those two programs. So then from there, what was more alarming to me was that once students were in those classrooms, they struggled to access other layers of feeling as though they belonged. So they were kind of on the periphery of like they're in these programs, but they question their intellect. They question whether or not they share any kind of background with other students in there. Many of them were, the only or one of a couple students of color in the room at a time, and not really seeing familiar faces in those programs with them, which limited for them how much they could really feel like they belonged there. And so that was all about for me. How do we build classrooms and specialty programming that serves all of our population from all of these different backgrounds? And how do we ensure that everyone, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what their parents do, regardless of their level of income, how do we ensure that they feel like they can achieve to the highest possible level in the academic rooms?
And when you were interviewing students, were they pretty keenly aware of not feeling like they belonged? Like, were you getting some good reflective insights from them? Or I'm assuming you didn't have to tease it
I
out really what
didn't.
was it looking
I
like.
intentionally made my questions really pretty vague. The stories that they told, I wasn't, they knew, they knew kind of the background of the study, my research question, but I didn't give them, like, I built the the framework for categorizing their responses around the stories that they told. So like that came in the data analysis after, so that I didn't want to have a situation where I had any kind of preconceived data set or that I was leading them. So the questions were super basic. And then I would ask like follow-up questions as we went along for clarification that would sometimes lead to deeper issues of feeling that separation from students or from teachers. But yeah, it very much was organic.
I wonder how your research has been received by other secondary teachers that you've gotten to talk to and really work through what could be different in classrooms. What's that been like?
So I have found, there are few people who have read my dissertation. A, nobody wants to read a dissertation. But B, I actually, mine's on embargo until this coming August. So August 2025, it gets publicly released. I did that for the anonymity of my kids and just the sample.
Are you anticipating being able to talk more and present more about your study then?
I've presented on it. This campus that I looked at has two main feeder middle schools. One of those feeder middle schools has what we call the middle years program. So the International Baccalaureate has a primary years program for elementary, a middle years program for middle school, and then the diploma program or certificate program or career related program for high school. And the middle years program, one thing that I discovered in trying to gather participants was that over 90% of students on average in any given cohort, and a cohort for APIB for um, the diploma seeking students, that begins in 11th grade. And I tell you that because they've had grades 9, grades 10, and then they choose whether they might enter one of those pathways. And what I learned is that for 90% or more of students in those pathways were coming from one of the middle schools. And you might guess that it's the one that has the language of the International Baccalaureate. So there's that familiarity with something that sounds like, that sounds scary. Like, I don't want to do the International Baccalaureate. Like, I can barely spell it. So,
Right, yeah.
but the other 10%, mostly coming from private schools or transferring in, and seldom were students entering those diploma programs coming from this second middle school. So we were moving to try to implement the middle years program, but our district is, this is like public knowledge, facing severe cutbacks because this is Texas and we're not actually supporting public education. So we had to hit pause on that. But one of the main things was that could help. And I think that teachers saw it, administrators saw it. Our district was super excited about it. So this was not a limitation of our leadership. It was like, at least not at the school and district level. It was like at the state level that we get cut off, But it was very well received. And I think it's just because what most of us want to do is give as many students as possible equal opportunities to achieve academically without any kind of limitation based on their background.
So with your experience and research, it sounds like you're saying that the sooner we can open up access to more students, maybe the more time we have to build that belonging before students get to high school. And then it's not maybe a question of like, do I belong here? But it's like, no, I did this during middle school. I know what this is.
Yep.
And so what advice would you give secondary advanced teachers regarding building belonging in their classroom? What's an easy move or low hanging fruit that they could think through? Because we know we have so many wonderful teachers who are aware and acknowledge this, but what can we do about it?
So I don't want to be the broken record of like, oh, let's say some key words like build relationships. But I think that knowing more deeply than we tend to go for icebreakers that are like two truths and a lie, and we don't really get beyond like a surface level. I think knowing the backgrounds of students, what their educational background looks like, what is their relationship with school, what do their parents do, or what do their guardians do, what does their family life look like, how many siblings do they have, do they work part-time. I think that our depth of understanding of each of our students, and I think it becomes particularly important in regard to socioeconomic background. That was one of the commonalities of students who don't feel like they're as connected in those advanced academic classrooms, is that those have traditionally, historically been spaces where it's students with high socioeconomic backgrounds are going into those programs. So sometimes there are part of connections with people or having like shared histories and shared experiences. And when you're in a room and you're the only person who doesn't have the shared experience of like going on a ski trip or having this vacation or, buying a car for your 16th birthday, that can be really, really ostracizing. And so I think having an awareness when you are building that classroom culture from day one of I'm going to have students who have never been on vacation. I'm going to have students who have wonder where their next meal is coming from. Just that hyper awareness. And I moved away from ever asking questions about or operating from the assumption that somebody had like a good spring break, for instance, because a lot of kids
Yeah,
don't.
that's huge. Thinking about breaks at all. Yeah, what it's
Yeah.
like for students leading up to that break and coming back. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I think being authentic with them and trying to really learn their backgrounds helps you in terms of building a genuine relationship. And that was one thing that students pointed to in terms of belonging. Like they could feel like they didn't belong with their peers all day long, but if they had a connection in the teacher and the teacher was seeking them out and pulling them in, then it was less important, like what their peers were doing.
Yeah. And so as we think about twice exceptional students, our students who are gifted and have disability, I'm wondering if there's an overlap in belonging and what that looks like, but also just wondering from your point of view, what the state is of twice exceptional secondary students at your school and how's that going? What's maybe some good things you're seeing or some things that could be done differently?
That's It's a loaded question. So I wish that there were more schools that were really properly implementing not necessarily the International Baccalaureate, but that the approaches to teaching and learning that really allow for exploration and individual curiosity and skill set to take a front seat rather than just well, you're 5 or you're 6, so you're in kindergarten and you're learning this, and you're 7, you're 8, you're in second grade and you're learning this. Less prescriptive, and there are challenges with that for sure, like teachers having to be self-contained in their content areas, meaning that they teach everything in the elementary years: English, math, science, social science.
Yeah. And interestingly, my first 3 years as a teacher, I taught fourth and fifth grade at an IB elementary school, and had a wonderful, supportive school leader who really allowed us to move through IB in the way that you're talking about, which is more student driven.
Yeah,
But there are the standards still hanging over you, right? It's like, okay, we're gonna move in the direction the students want to go, but we do kind of have to get
yeah, we also need
here.
this.
And there's a lot of coming up with things on short notice because that's what students really need. But it was the most valuable teaching experience I had for sure when I could approach it that
Yeah.
way. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the state standards are a whole other story. And at the high school level, I don't know anything about the elementary level. I know at the secondary level, though, if you have a class where you are teaching at a higher level the kids are doing a lot of critical thinking, they're doing a lot of writing, regardless of the directions that they may be taking some of those things. And teacher is acting more as a knowledgeable facilitator. I feel kids are going to get there to take the standardized test. Like, you can have the standards in the back of your mind all day long. The kids don't care. And they're going to get there. Like, if you're teaching, if you're, engaging in just good teaching, they're going to get there without having to do a whole lot of bookish test prep.
Yeah, and I'd like to throw in some confirmation bias here to say that when I was teaching 4th and 5th grade, my co-teacher, separate class, took in 5th grade, they had to take the standardized science test here in Colorado. And we did not pay attention at all to what was going to be on the test. We were like, this is not what we're here for. And the students ended up scoring the highest in the district. It's a tiny district, but still, it was a testament to what you're saying, which is follow what is good teaching and learning and make it more student driven. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
So talk to me about twice exceptional support at the secondary level. I know it's so individualized. It's very hard to say twice exceptional as a blanket term because everybody's different, but would love to hear if you have any successful anecdotes about secondary 2E students.
So secondary 2E students are, I think, a lot more common than we think. I think that the number of them who have been actually stamped with gifted and talented, I think that's low. I think we probably have a lot more gifted and talented students that have not been classically identified. Then in addition to that, I would say the vast majority of students, I think about ADD, ADHD, autism, it's just humanity on a spectrum. And we are all, to some degree, could be having some of the, these symptoms of ADHD, symptoms of ADD. And so with the 2E learners who are gifted and talented, and then they are also autistic or they have ADHD, I think the more programming that is offered where they get to become the leaders in their own education, the better. I don't think that you can just sub in or just say oh, well, we have International Baccalaureate, we have AP, so we're supporting 2E learners. That's not enough. But I think recognition in those classrooms of all of these kids and all of their different needs, which it's super exhausting, but it's also super rewarding. And I think my favorite kids I probably shouldn't say that. My favorite kids are always 2E though. There's no question, because people don't think about ADHD or ADD or autism as a superpower. But that's exactly what it is. We just have to figure out tapping into it. And what do you, as this individual learner, need to maximize your learning? And that comes down to, again, good teaching, to differentiation, willingness to engage with them and let them advocate for themselves about what they might need, and acceptance from the teacher side that's going to look very different for different kids. And we can say all day long, well, we used to just set them in desks and they learn them up, and they sat still and all of that, but we're not doing that anymore, because I don't think that was probably very good for any of us either.
Yeah. And so since I'm not as aware of the compliance aspect of gifted education in Texas, for 2E students, let's say a student's on a 504, do they also have an advanced learning plan or a gifted plan at all? Or is it just the label that they have?
Will also, depending on the circumstances for the student, they will also have a gifted plan or set of, this is what this student's giftedness looks like. And I would say we're getting a lot better about labeling those things.
So that would be more as a reference, but it's not here are the advanced opportunities the student is getting.
No, it's more here's how this presents.
Okay. And so does every gifted student have that?
I have
not just
not
2E
seen
students?
that for every gifted student, but for a handful. Oftentimes that has been, in my experience, students, autistic students who have also the delineation of here's how giftedness presents for them.
Yeah. So what would you say to someone who's like, what's the benefit of having a gifted label?
I think in some ways it it doesn't matter. Depending on the school, like it just doesn't matter because the supports are not in place to do a whole lot with that label. Beyond, we have International Baccalaureate, we have advanced placement, we have all of these clubs, we have robotics. Like we have the outlets in place for these students to seek these opportunities where they can hone their giftedness. I don't think that it has been structured in such a way that we are necessarily paying all that much attention to that. So for me as a teacher, I'm just going to like assume the whole room is gifted. And they probably got something else too. So yeah, I mean I think the label can be handy if you, and maybe more and more so. The more that we talk about it, the more that teachers are paying attention to the paperwork and we're differentiating in the classroom more and more, then the label maybe becomes more helpful, but not necessarily. Like if your kid's not labeled GT, you think they're GT, fantastic. Put them in all the programs and support them as best you can. I don't think that the label defines any of these kids.
Yeah, I think that's a constant question. And especially in Colorado, as students get to high school, it's like, well, why do I care about having this label? And while we do have advanced learning plans as a requirement from the state where we have to outline what they're doing each year to have advanced opportunities and it's standards based,
Yeah.
kids are like, and so what?
Yeah.
And so what, right? Like, how does this matter to me? So, something that I continue to think about is just how do we make the student experience for gifted students more meaningful at the secondary level? And I don't have an answer for it, but I was willing to talk about it. So as we close out, I'd love to know just what's giving you hope right now. I know there's a lot of heaviness that we're witnessing just in the public education realm right now, but where are you seeing any moments of growth or possibility for our exceptional learners?
I just, every day that I get to work with kids, particularly for me, like that's in those programs, but more specifically, even I also coach academic decathlon and octathlon. And every single one of the kids in those programs, like they're 2E and not necessarily labeled, but they are. They are. And those kids, they give me hope because they still have hope. So when we become so tainted by the world, I have a teacher friend who says he'll know like if it's ever time to go when they stop being funny. So I think it's their humor and it's their forward thinking and their interest in, I mean, genuine interest in problem solving, usually. They look at some of the things that are issues in the world and they're like, why? Like, why is this a problem? Like, why have we not already solved climate change? Like, why is this a thing? Like, why are our legislators, why are they yelling at each other? They don't have the same like experience, lifelong experience yet. So seeing their hope and knowing how intelligent they are, how compassionate they are, that gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Well, thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope I can get you back on again. I think we have a ton more to talk about, so I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thank you for having me. And yes, I feel like I could talk to you for hours on end.
This episode of Exceptionally Speaking is brought to you by Hex 24 Press, where education meets imagination. I founded Hex 24 Press in 2024 to uplift educator voices and provide a publishing home for myself and other educators to bring our work into the world. You can find more information about today's guests, including links to their resources and services, at hex24press.com. Thank you for supporting educators, independent creators, and small business. We're so glad you're here.